Good evening, everybody. My name's Tom Perera, and I'm W1TP for ham for 67 years and counting, and I keep on counting, and I'm going to keep on counting. I started out in New York City as a ham and stayed in New York City, went to Columbia University and got my various degrees there. And then I kept on teaching at Columbia University and also at Montclair State University in New Jersey. When my kids started getting mugged on the streets of New York, I decided we had to move to New Jersey, and that's also a great school. So I'm retired. I was a professor of neuroscience. Sounds like a fancy name, but actually it is a ham's way of getting into the field. And what I did was to measure the tiny little electrical signals that are given off by the nervous system and the brain. So I was really studying the electrical activity of the nervous system, but neuroscience sounds much more interesting. So I'm going to take you on a tour of Phil Weingarten, the great crook and duplicator of various things. And we'll start out with a, let's see if I can get this thing to work. Okay, there we go. Phil Weingarten, there he is. And I'm going to take you through three aspects of his life and career. I'm going to talk about his fake telegraph keys, his fake radios, and his fake tubes. He was born in 1914 and he died in 1998. So he had many years of doing this, and we're going to sort of follow him through on that. This is one of the reasons I think that he got into the field. That yellow arrow up there points to his father. Sitting in a class of World War I potential radio operators and studying this device over here on the right, which is a spark transmitter. So this is how they instructed people on the use of radio back then. Phil was born at a point where he could really enjoy the peak of Radio Row. By the time Radio Row hit its peak of activity in New York City, it was hundreds of radio stores in a relatively small area of New York City around 1945. And Phil hung out in Radio Row for a very long time. I'll just show a few pictures of Radio Row. You can see some wonderful old radios here for sale. And notice on the right side here, a bunch of storage batteries, and that's how you would power your radios in those days. If you couldn't afford one of these radios, you could also always pick up a chassis. Any of these chassis, and boy, they look pretty complete, for 25 cents a piece. And you could do your own repairs on it. And if you didn't have the parts, you go over to another store in Radio Row and you could buy virtually any parts you wanted, 75 cents for a chassis and all the parts over here on the right. And if you didn't like doing it yourself, this place would rewire it for you. So Radio Row was really a fascinating place during that time period. It was also the time of the early days of Radio Shack. And here's a picture of the Radio Shack company in Boston during those days. And it was also a time where all of these radio stores in New York City were open and encouraging people to come in. And I just loved that because I grew up in New York City and I was a young ham at that point. And it was a very simple trip for me to get down to Radio Row and hang out there. And I did. Every once in a while, a store like Morrell's up here would have a sale and it would get absolutely mobbed. People would come from all over for the sale. So it was a very exciting time. And here's a picture of me at the age of 15. I had just gotten my novice license. And unlike many of you and many hams, my parents had a lot of money. And I was very, very lucky about that. And so I figured, oh boy, I'm going to get into ham radio. Daddy, I want a receiver. I want a Collins receiver. Okay, kid, go ahead and buy it. So I went down to Radio Row and I bought a Collins receiver, if you can imagine a novice with a Collins receiver. And then I went down there as soon as I got my license and I went to the same guy and I said, I want to buy a Collins transmitter to go with my Collins receiver. And he said, sorry, kid, I can't sell it to you. I will not sell you a transmitter until you've built your own. And that was the best thing that guy ever did for me, because I built this Eldico transmitter on the left, crystal controlled, with an 807 in the final. And that was my transmitter. And I learned a lot about building things from that. And I wouldn't have learned any of that if I had just gone out and bought another Collins radio. So that's a little story about how I got started in this. And Radio Row itself was just fascinating. Arrow Electronics was the place to go for any parts that you wanted and test equipment. Here's a picture inside Arrow. Look at that wonderful display in the upper right-hand corner of all that ICO test equipment. Of course, you wouldn't think of buying a built piece of test equipment. You had to build it yourself. And so you build the ICO scope, and you build the ICO signal generator, and you build all these other wonderful ICO tube testers. And that gives you a little more skill as you're going along. But the real wonderful place, the heaven from Radio Row, was Harrison Radio. Harrison Radio had a used area in which they had, look at this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 KWM1s, KWM1 transceivers, about 3 KWM2s, a whole bunch of Collins equipment over here. And you could just walk down this aisle and pick out things. It was unbelievable. How you could not walk down this aisle without buying something. And Mr. Harrison was particularly partial to kids, and I was a kid. So I had to go up to him and I say, Mr. Harrison, I really want one of these radios over here, but I only have, and I'd knock $100 off the price. I only have, and offer him that. And he'd say, okay, kid, I'm going to take a loss on this, but get it out of here. Get it out of here. Unbelievable place. Can you imagine in those days having this much used equipment, all these hams who must have bought this equipment and then traded it in with Harrison to get fancier and fancier and newer equipment. Anyway, that was absolute heaven for me. And as you can see, I started populating my shack, and it got a little bit out of hand. I built my own pair of 813 kilowatt on the left here, but I had a Collins receiver and a Johnson transmitter and a National receiver. This thing in the right on the table here was fantastic. It was a Hallicrafters DD1, Delta Delta 1, which is a diversity receiver. It means it had 2 complete front ends, and you hooked it to 2 different antennas, and you could use a little control to pick out the signal that was coming in best and select that signal. Fantastic. And of course, a pan adapter and a scope, just all sorts of wonderful stuff. And as you can see, I got really carried away with this, but I wasn't the only one. Phil Weingarten was hanging out in the same area. And while I was buying pieces of equipment for my ham shack, he was buying stuff, all kinds of stuff. And he was gradually building the most incredible selection of parts and tubes. And he could build anything with that selection. There's a picture of him with some of his beautifully laid out and beautifully organized stock. And here is a picture of his test bench. He has a couple of pieces of surplus equipment there, all kinds of signal generators and wonderful stuff for aligning and fixing receivers. But the main thing about Phil was that he absolutely loved old radios. And so he started collecting old radios, and he eventually put together a museum. This is the Old Timers Bulletin from AWA, Volume 9 in 1967. And in 1967, he had built this museum, and AWA reported on this museum in the Old Timers Bulletin. And what Phil was really doing was he had made up a bunch of sort of fake IDs. He had called himself the Forest Hills Wireless Museum, and he encouraged people to make contributions to his museum so he could show stuff. He also called himself the Marconi Museum of Wireless Telegraphy, and he also called himself the Radio Tube Repair Laboratories. He was a Mars program ham also. And so he did all of this stuff and attracted a lot of equipment that way. And he also bought a lot of equipment. He was elected a full member of the Antique Wireless Association, AWA, in 1964. And his collection was staggering. I'm just going to run through it real quickly here. I'm going to give you about 3 seconds per picture because it is staggering. The equipment that he collected in his museum goes on and on and on. And these are not duplicated pictures. These are different parts of his museum. Absolutely beautiful stuff. An incredible typewriter down here that sends Morse code, a little clackety clack sounder in the back of the typewriter. Wonderful telegraph equipment here on a table, and tubes. Oh man, tubes you've never seen the likes of before. Really old, really rare tubes by the dozens, by the hundreds. An amazing collection. And a friend of mine, Joel Kossoff, W3ZT, is a member of AWA. He was a young kid at that point, and Phil over here on the right liked young kids. And Joel, as far as I can tell, was one of the very few, maybe 10 people who ever got to see the inside of Phil's wireless museum. He called it the Forest Hills and Marconi Wireless Museum, but he never let anybody in to see it. So Joel was able to report on it, and Joel says the following. He said, I think Phil was nice to me because he thought it was nice to see a young guy who was interested in early radio history. I think I made 2 or 3 trips to Phil's house. He took me to visit a guy named Hugo, who was a real craftsman at restoring or making phony reproductions, but we didn't discuss phony reproductions. Another time, Phil took me to visit a real old timer, W2 Whiskey X-Ray, who was a World War I US Army intercept operator on the Mexican border in Texas. So Phil was really into all this stuff, and very good to Joel, and we were able to get these wonderful pictures of his museum. Let's start out with Phil's counterfeit telegraph keys. Phil made these incredibly accurate duplications of telegraph keys and sold them as originals. And Hugo, who did all of the telegraph key building for him, reported that in all, Phil had made 6 Massey telegraph keys, the one you just saw, 20 Marconi telegraph keys. The word Marconi immediately quadruples the value of a telegraph key, of course, and 6 Marconi Grasshopper keys. And when asked if he knew that Phil sold them as originals, Hugo said, "I don't know nothing about that stuff." And that was it. So we never got Hugo to talk anything about the fakes, but he did the machining. And let's take a look at Hugo. Here's a wonderful picture of Hugo in front of one of his toolboxes. And here is Hugo's machine shop. And it is just staggering. Look at that incredible machine shop. He could make anything, I swear, and make it work as well. And he was not only making stuff for Phil, he was fixing things for people. People would drift into his shop in the neighborhood in Brooklyn, bring him in a broken this or that, and he'd fix it for them. He was just the most wonderful guy. Here's a picture of Phil over here. And at the end of his life, when he was moving out of Brooklyn, he decided he was going to donate most of his equipment to the New Jersey Antique Radio Club. And I put this little logo on the back of this gentleman who is helping Phil to cart this stuff out. And here's the NJARC rental truck with people bringing it out. This is Phil's machine shop and office over here on the street in Brooklyn, carrying these things into the budget rental truck. So it was a wonderful thing of him to do that. Let's look at his keys. This is an original Massey Spark key being run by Bob Merriam, who ran the New England Museum of Wireless and Steam, where they had a wonderful spark transmitter set up and running. And here is a fake Massey Spark key, which Phil had made. And Phil had a way of antiquing the brass. Matter of fact, there was a little guy who had a shop right around the corner from him, sold little chemicals. And if you dribbled those chemicals on brass, it would make them turn dark and make them look 100 years older. And Phil used that stuff liberally. When I visited that shop, they sold me some of that stuff, and it's very powerful. All sorts of acid would etch into the metal. But anyway, this is one of the fake Massey keys that Phil made. And very difficult to tell because Massey made two keys, one with a dark handle that you saw before and one with a brass handle like this. And it was very hard to tell a fake Massey key from the real thing unless you looked at the label on the key. And on the top here, you see a Massey system wireless telegraph key label from a real Massey key. And down in the bottom here, you see Phil's fake replica of the label. He made this replica in a sand casting device that he had. So he took an original and put it in the sand and then cast brass into the sand and made this copy. And that's one of the two ways you could tell a fake Massey, a fake Phil Weingarten Massey from a real Massey. The other was if you unscrewed the knob, Phil used a 1/4 20 cadmium plated screw to screw the knob into the key, whereas the real Massey key had a 1/4 20 brass key, screw that screwed it in. So it was possible to tell the difference. Phil sold those Massey keys that you just saw for about $7,000 a piece because they were, of course, original. And the reason that I have this key right in front of me, actually, is that one of the people he sold it to got very, 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 very angry at Phil, tried to get after him. And it turns out Phil always kept a loaded Luger under the sofa cushion in his living room in case people came after him. And so this guy found out about that and didn't bother going after Phil. But he did come to me and he said, "Tom, will you get rid of this damn thing? I don't want it in my collection. I'll give it to you. Give me $100 and it's yours." So I couldn't resist having a Phil Massey key for $100, even if it was a fake. So on to the next one. Phil made these Marconi CM425 keys. And this is an original Marconi CM425. And you can notice very carefully the contacts on here. And these are original contacts from the CM425. And Phil made a replica that you see down on the bottom. And he said, "It's not a replica. It's not a fake. It uses real Massey contacts." And indeed, he had somehow managed to buy up all of the stock of old Marconi contacts and put them on his keys. But you can notice a couple of other differences. Notice that the real Marconi bends down nicely. The Phil Marconi is a step down to the knob. The other thing that's different is the plate. Phil wasn't very good at duplicating name tags. And so we have the real one back there and the fake one in the front. This is the real tag on the top here, and this is Phil's fake. Phil had a little engraving machine and he would engrave, but occasionally he'd make little mistakes like up there. And you could sort of tell a Phil engraved tag from a real tag. But anyway, it was pretty funny what he did. The funniest thing he ever did with telegraph keys was take one of his fake keys and put it on an award gift to a person in honor of something. And he sold this thing to a collector for almost $10,000. And if you read the saying on what he had here, he said, "Presented to Ludwig Arnson." There never was a Ludwig Arnson. "On December 7th, 1953, by his associates in Radio Receptor, in commemoration of 50 years devoted to the radio and electronics industry since he sent the first CQD wireless signal on December 7th, 1903. Ludwig Arnson didn't exist, and that signal was never sent on that date. What a magnificently crazy thing for Phil to do, to sell this thing for a huge amount of money. Anyway, move on to another of his fakes. He made fake Marconi Grasshopper keys. These are exceptionally rare. He sold these for $10,000 to people, and a lot of them don't even realize to this day that they have a Phil Weingarten fake because we don't know a good way of telling this from the real thing. Here's an incredible thing that he did. He took this telegraph key up here and mounted it in a box, and he used his engraving device to say order number 4089, serial number, and so on. At the end, it says airplane hand key, SE59. SE is the designation given to many World War I telegraph keys. And over here's the funniest thing. He said Signal Corps, U.S. Army, but he misspelled Signal Corps. And so here he's selling this thing as a very, very rare military World War I aircraft key, when actually it came out of this rather common field set. And if you open up this field buzzer set from World War I, you see there's the key right there. And every one of these buzzer sets had that key in it. And he had taken that key out and mounted it and labeled it and sold it as a really, really important historical antique. This is the funniest thing I think he's ever did with a key. This is a Japanese bug sold by Radio Shack Company, sold by Lafayette Radio. Very, very cheap bug. You could buy them for about 10 bucks. And what did Phil do? He bought one of these and he labeled it the Marconi International Marine Communications Company Limited, London. And he put a label on it and he sold this thing for $5,000. Can you imagine somebody buying this thing, thinking they're getting a Marconi bug? There weren't even, one never was a Marconi bug, but Phil convinced them that it was really valuable. And that's a funny one, I think. The next thing he did, we'll talk about, is he decided that he had so many radios, he didn't really want to part with them, so he was going to build his own. And here is a DeForest radio that he built, and here it is with the Audion tube and the proper label. Everything looks totally kosher on this thing. It's a DeForest RJ9. He sold these for about $6,000. And the label, you look really closely at the label and it's really accurate. And it turned out that he had had a company make up dozens of these labels, and he just pinned them onto whatever radio he was trying to sell at that point, and it made them into official DeForest, official radios. And here's some of his DeForest labels that he put on radios. And here, down here, we see a Marconi label. He had these labels made up and they've validated his radios. Here's a Wallace detector, very, very rare radio, beautifully made. And you can see the label on top. Of course, Phil did the lettering on this label. And on the side here, he used some of that special chemical to make his label look old. And so we see the label with that special aging compound to put it, patina, on the radio. He had lots and lots of labels that he had tucked away. When he died, his estate contained all of this stuff. And he also had actual Atwater Kent warranty cards that he had printed up, and he could put these on the Atwater Kent radios that he sold and sell them as new. Hey, we got this Atwater Kent for you, and it had never been registered. Look at the original warranty card and so on. He was amazing. But this was the king of all of his fakes. Phil decided he was not only going to produce a fake radio, but he was going to produce a fake company making radios. And so he learned how to engrave these letters on the front of a radio. And he went down to Radio Row. Remember, I showed you Radio Row. He went and bought these 25-cent radios. And he would then take his lettering device and he would letter it Super DX8, manufactured by Lutz Company. There never was a Lutz Company ever. Type L, serial number 518. That makes it a very rare radio. The only thing that was honest about this was that it was made in Long Island City, which is where he lived. It was just the funniest thing. And people bought these things right and left, all kinds of Lutz radios. They were just old junk radios that had been picked up off the street. And finally, the AWA got wind of this, and they started publishing articles in the Old Timers Bulletin. First of all, in '68, Phil ran ads in the Old Timers Bulletin saying basically, I want Marconi receivers in any condition. I can trade you DeForest Audions, apparatus, Paragon, Greeby, and I'll pay top prices for Marconi receivers. So he was out to get them. And then the AWA got smart. Members are again advised to be aware of a questionable radio collector dealer in the New York City area who uses different names and addresses. Several members have been taken by this shady character. He's no longer an AWA member, although he appears to have access to the AWA bulletin want ads. If in doubt, check with us. Not an AWA member. One keeps changing his name and location, Forest Hills and Rego Park, New York, but always the same zip code. So AWA was getting on to Phil at that point. But Phil, nevertheless, was making fake tubes. And, you know, he had all these radios, he had to make tubes for them. And he learned to make some extremely effective looking and impressive looking tubes. He did that because he was working for Dumont Laboratories, and he set up his own tube blowing rack here on his sink in his kitchen to start with. And he started blowing a really simple tube called a Marconi coherer, and that's just a little horizontal piece of glass with a couple of metal electrodes and some iron filings between them. And this is an original Marconi coherer, and this is a Phil Weingarten fake Marconi coherer. And you'll notice that he has engraved the ivory substrate that this device is mounted on using his engraving device over here on the end. And here are Phil Weingarten parts ready to be tied together to make a coherer. And here it says MWT Company Limited, Marconi Wireless Telegraph Company Limited, and so on. So that was his first foray, and they're relatively easy to make. You just take a tube of glass, meld another tube onto it, seal it off, put the electrodes in, and you've got it. Then he got more elaborate, and he got into this shop. He built his own shop in his basement, and he started collecting huge amounts of equipment to make Audion tubes. And this is the way his shop looked in 1948. This is a crossfire device that's used for melding glass while it's on a lathe, an oxyacetylene torch, an oxyhydrogen torch, all of these things necessary for making glass tubes. And these are all pictures of the devices that were bought from his estate by a man in the West who bought all of his equipment. And I'll just read you very quickly some of the things. Bench lathe, a Lytton type FHSA lathe with planetary chucks, finger crossfires that go with the Lytton NSA lathe, two-stage Senko roughing pump, a mercury diffusion pump under the bench, also a small plating tank nearby, and then just on and on and on about equipment that he had put together for making these things. And this is his final tube blowing and tube testing apparatus. And you can see the vacuum pumps underneath here, the tubes in a glass display, a box, so that if they blew up, they wouldn't damage you. And very, very elaborate stuff that he had for making these tubes. His tubes were made from basic parts. The spherical Audion started out looking like this, the Fleming valve like this. You could buy these pieces from glass supply places and then work them yourself. He collected all kinds of light bulbs and took the brass bases off the light bulbs and made a collection of those for use in making his tubes. He went out and actually bought some appropriate metal plates for his Audions. He bought special wires for his Audions. He bought filament wire from companies that made that sort of thing for his Audions, and he put them all together. This is various stages of assembling an Audion. This is just the filament here. This is the filament and the grid and the plate put together. And you take this thing and then melt it into the tube, and you get what you're working for. These are some of his plans for making audions. And here is a Phil Weingarten audion. You can see the tube, the screw-in brass base that he took off some light bulb somewhere. You can see the part with holding the parts of the audion here, and you can see the other parts of the audion up here. If you look closely at it, it looks pretty rudimentary. You see the filament wire up here, 2 parts here, and you see the grid, which is the wiggly thing there, and you see the plate in the background. Again, the filament in front, the grid controlling the flow of electrons, filament to plate, and the plate over here on the left. And here are a couple of his completed audions, complete with labels that tell what company made or sold it in this case. And they're very, very effective looking, very convincing looking devices. A lot of people bought them. He sold them for about anywhere between $1,000 and $3,000. And again, the AWA caught on to this, and the Old Timers Bulletin had a number of articles which talked about fake tubes, fake audions, shady character in New York, in Brooklyn, who's making these things. And this is in 1986. And he was actually kicked out of the AWA at about that time. Bruce Kelly kicked him out of the AWA because of all the things that Phil had done. And so he didn't have access to the AWA anymore, but it didn't seem to matter because he was able to sell these things to a wide variety of people. Now, there have been plenty of people who've made fake tubes in the past, but all of them that we know about, at least, have been ethical about it and labeled them. This is a guy named Dr. Rüdiger Walzer, and he's a German. He made magnificent copies of very famous and early tubes. And the thing that he did was he actually stamped the word replica into the so-called press. When you press the glass together to hold all of the elements in the proper place, it's called a press. He would press the word replica into the press so that nobody could ever suspect that this was not, that this was an original tube. Very ethical thing to do. Here's a letter from Phil Weingarten to a man in Holland who was interested in buying a Marconi Fleming valve from him. And of course, it was a Phil Weingarten fake Marconi Fleming valve. But in the letter, he said, you will pay me $750 plus shipping for this and other things about this. So Phil was selling this fake tube to a man in Holland named Dirk Rohorst. And here is a letter that Phil sent to Dirk from Jerry Tyne. Jerry Tyne is one of the great experts on tube history at the AWA. And Jerry Tyne talks about this as being a very important tube. And so Dirk thought that he was getting a really extraordinary buy for only $750. And here it is, the Fleming oscillotron valve, as he called it, as Phil called it, and it was made by Marconi Wireless Telegraph Company Limited. And it is interesting to see that when Dirk got this, he saw my talk on Phil Weingarten. He said, "Oh my God, I wonder if I bought a fake from Phil." He was very upset about it. He'd spent $750 plus shipping to get this thing to Holland. And so we both went to one of the great experts on Marconi equipment, and that is Jim Cruiser. And I'd like to read you the letter that Jim Cruiser wrote about this. "I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but this is a prime example of a Weingarten fake. It's a classic reproduction of Phil's in which he made use of Hugo's engraving machine, which was limited as to the size and typeface of the engraving letters. The ivory ? Nameplate, probably plastic, also contains too much information for a label of this size, and it suspiciously overlaps the base by a considerable amount. You would never see a Marconi wireless company apply such a label to one of their early tubes. The black sealant on the base is also one of Phil's specialty. As to the bulb itself, Fleming and DeForest used platinum leads that were sealed at the arbor end, and they would never use copper wire as in this example. The binding posts on the base are also from the late teens to the 1920s, clearly later than Phil claimed. So Dirk was really, really upset about this. And I asked him if he would come over to America for the talk I was going to give on Phil Weingarten and bring his Fleming valve with him so that we could all see it. And I gave this talk, I think, in maybe 2013 at AWA. And Dirk made the trip to America with this tube just to show everybody. He was so angry. He wanted people to see what Phil had done to him. And so he brought this tube, and here's a picture of Dirk with a very big smile on his face at the AWA auction. I talked him into putting this tube in the auction, and by God, Dirk managed to get $1,950 for the tube he had paid $750 for at the 2007 AWA conference auction. So I guess that was the date 2007. So an interesting thing that Phil Weingarten's reproductions or fakes have actually become more valuable now that he is dead. And certainly to go from $750, which Phil thought was an outrageous price for that tube, to $1950 in that length of time is quite amazing. So the first that I saw of some of the stuff coming out of Phil's laboratory and his workshop was some equipment that was bought by this gentleman, and it showed up at a New Jersey flea market. He had a lot of the stuff on his table, and I was attracted over because there was a lot of early wireless stuff there. And I bought a number of things that had been in Phil's workshop, but this is what was left of Phil's equipment. And some of it, the papers were bought by Jim Cruiser at AWA, and a man out west bought some of the equipment for making tubes. But it was a very interesting and I think important component of antique radio history, and a very important time for antique radio history. I can only wonder how many other fakes are out there that we don't know about, that were made by semi-fakers and that we'll never find out about. I also wonder how many Phil Weingarten fakes are out there. He certainly didn't label them. There's only one person in the world who's a real expert at determining them, and that is Jim Cruiser. So I think that it'd be interesting to know that. And with that, I'm going to quit and try to answer any questions that you may have. And let's see, we'll stop sharing and turn it over to you. Thanks for your attention. Hope you enjoyed it.
Excellent.
I only wish we could clap and appreciate.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. And you didn't stop talking for a second. You're amazing. Absolutely amazing.
That's what comes of being a professor. You know, you can't let your students go to sleep in class. And there's, no matter what you do, you jump up and down, you scream, you yell, you show dirty pictures. Just don't let the students go to sleep or you lose your job.
I have two questions, if I may. Can I ask a question? First question is, when was he arrested?
He was never,
1, 2, check 1, 2, yeah. So we actually have, this thing's got enough kick.
Darren, you're buzzy.
When was he arrested? No one ever went after him for any of this stuff?
Nobody went after him, but he did keep that Luger under the cushion in his sofa, and that definitely dissuaded individual customers from going after him. Technically, I don't know if he really broke any laws. Yes, he said this is original, but used car salesmen tell you the same thing. So I'm not sure what you could arrest him for.
I think a fraud would be one thing.
Counterfeiting.
But the other question I have for you is, one of your early slides said that he was either in connection with Hugo Gernsback Is that
No, it's not Hugo Gernsback. I'm sorry. It's Hugo
right?
Pisciani.
It just I thought I saw Gernsback's name on one of your early slides,
I
and I
don't,
was
I
curious
don't
about that
think
because he
so.
was the father of science fiction, and the U-boat was named after him. That's why I was curious. Okay, thank
I
you.
don't think so, but I'll look again.
Okay, thanks.
Anyone else with questions?
Has
And
anybody else been banned from the
even better,
AWA?
anybody else with memories of Hugo that you would share with us? Those of you who were in with a great pickup of equipment from his shop and so on. Anybody care to make comments on that?
Well,
Well, it appears that with all that glass blowing and processing equipment, that his fakes might actually be working fakes. Is that true?
It is all in working shape. Is that what you were saying?
I mean, the quote fakes that he made were working replicas. I mean,
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, they were. They were good working replicas. Matter of fact, he was really ethical about it. He never sold any of his tubes that weren't working, which meant he insisted that they have a proper vacuum and that they show some transconductance. And if they didn't, he'd take it back in his shop and suck out a little more air.
Did he ever sell replicas on purpose? You know, since obviously he could make them, he could have sold legit replicas too.
What's a legit replica?
Like ones where you told people that I made this in my garage to look like a real one, you know, like the other guy in Germany. Did he ever market intentional replicas?
I've never heard of him telling anyone that it was a replica. He wanted to extract the maximum amount of money from people that he possibly could.
Makes
And he
sense.
wasn't about to give away anything that he had done or tell anybody. People didn't even know that he was making these things until after he died.
Can I jump in here a little bit?
Sure.
Okay, Tom, I guess I know Hugo more for a longer time and better than anybody in this club or anybody that knows him in this club. But anyway, I got to know him when I needed a part for an NCN dial. The ceramic coupling was missing from the box. So I put an ad, and I think it was Antique Radio Classified. And he answered. He sent me a letter, the handwritten letter, telling me he had it. He sent me the article, and I called him up. I said, "What do you want? How much do I owe you?" He says, "Just put something in a collection box when you go on Sunday." So I thought that was a wonderful answer. I liked that answer, and he was intriguing. So when I used to go to New York City, I would stop by. I would take the 4th Avenue line or the D line, and I would go to see him, and I'd spend a few hours. And he had a club where people would come in and go out. They were called the 7th Street, because he lived on, his address was 314 7th Street. And they were called the 7th Street Irregulars. And they just came and went. He was excellent. Anything you wanted, he would make. He would design it. He would make. All you had to do was say, "This is what I want. What can you do?" And he would do it. We had a lot of conversations. One conversation was he told me about, because he was in the Army, and he was a technician, and I think he went to the rank of corporal, maybe sergeant. But he was there was a P-51 that had landed at Floyd Bennett Field in Brooklyn, and they couldn't get it started. They called him up because he was in the service. They called him up and said, "Listen, we have this problem. This P-51 engine, this Merlin engine won't start." He says, "I know what it is." He says, "There's a booster coil on that. When you start it, the spark is amplified with the booster coil." Just happened to have one. So he went down with the booster coil, put it in, plane started up, and off he went. So he was quite a character. Listening to your lecture, the one thing that keeps coming to mind is, I mean, he just died, what, a year ago, maybe less. But I was just hoping, my wish was to have Hugo sit next to me looking at this lecture to see what his expression would be, to see if he gave any, he was the one that could comment on this better than I could or anybody could. But he's not with us now. But he was quite a character. Anything that was paid to him, anything he did for me or anything I bought from him, I said, "What do I owe you?" He says, "Listen, whatever you want to give me, it's going to charity. I have more than enough to live with. So he actually helped put a girl through college anonymously, he told me. So he was quite a guy. And there was no doubt in my mind after seeing your lecture that a lot of this stuff came from Hugo. He never told me about it. He told me a little bit about Phil, how he got to meet him on Cortlandt Street when he met him because he wanted this barrel of tubes, because Hugo was a big collector. And you always told the story with the Jewish accent. And it was funny. Was you want for this price of bulbs, these tubes, what's the barrel price? And Phil didn't know what barrel price meant. He says, what do you mean barrel price? What means this barrel price? So that's how they got to know each other on Cortlandt Street. That's got to be the way they knew each other. Because
Thank you, Bob. Robert, I really appreciate that, because I thought of him as sort of a scoundrel, and you've completely turned me around. I think he was really a beautiful person, probably did not have any real desire to lie to people or anything. He let Phil do that, and I think his place was simply to be the machinist for Phil. I just wanted to show you, this is the Massey key, and it is really massive. You can see why they call people brass pounders, because the handle is quite an amazing thing. And this is the fake, and you can see maybe the label there a little bit. The one that I showed in the picture. This was made by Hugo, and it's beautifully done. Everything is perfect on it. I don't know, I would sort of doubt that Hugo made the label because it's so sloppy. It's a sand casting. That looks more like something that Phil would do, because Hugo's stuff is immaculate.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for your comments about Hugo. I'm really glad that Robert and I have been friends for a long time. We've suffered through a number of the World War II reenactments in Reading, Pennsylvania, with bad weather and otherwise. And Robert started telling me about Hugo, and it really changed me around. I appreciate that.
Good.
Any other comments, questions? Anything about Hugo or anything else? Radio Row? Was anybody down in Radio Row during those days that I pointed out?
Oh yeah, when I was a kid, we used to love to go to Cortlandt Street. It was just something else.
Tell us some stories. I'll tell you, just one of my favorites is Leeds Radio, Leeds, was run by an old guy with never without a cigar in his mouth, chomping on that cigar. And he was really nasty. People would walk into his store, and if he didn't like him, he'd say, get out, I don't want you in here. And he would get drunk about 3 o'clock in the afternoon on Friday. And I was a little kid, so he didn't mind me. And finally, I found him one Friday. He was really starting to get very drunk. And I said, Mr. Leeds, you know me, I'm Tommy. And would you let me go upstairs and look upstairs? I knew that the 4 stories above his main shop were just full of stuff. And he said, okay, kid, go on, do it. And that was just heaven. I had 4 stories of just piles of surplus stuff to go through. That was amazing. And one more story about Phil himself. He ran a used radio and part store on Canal Street, Phil Weingarten, and you had to go down a set of steps to go into it. And I have a dear friend, Arnold Oleand, who went there with his father one time and with his brother. And Arnold picked up something in the store and asked Phil how much it cost. And Phil said, for you, it's $10. For your brother with that beard, it's $20. He didn't like the way his brother looked because he had a beard.
Hey, Tom?
Yes.
Okay, had a couple of things on Canal Street and Cortlandt Street, but you mentioned that store down the basement, or down the stairs on Canal Street. Was that on Canal and Church?
I don't remember. It was on the south side of Canal near a corner, and that was Phil's store. Did you get in there?
Yeah, well, what happened was back in the 60s, I used to live in Queens. I used to hop on the F train, go down to Canal Street, Radio Row, I should say. I remember Harrison. That's where I bought my first S38E, my first shortwave radio. And do you remember Leotones?
Oh, sure. Yes,
Old lady
definitely.
Leotone, grouchy old lady.
Yeah, yeah.
They sold speakers, and I think that whole store had 150-watt light bulb. So dark in that store. Leeds, did he sell to his son maybe? Because I remember when I went there, it wasn't an old man. It was like a middle-aged guy.
Yeah,
I was
he,
gonna
he
say
died,
that.
died early. His son took it over and set it up in Brooklyn. And then I believe he took it out of Brooklyn and moved somewhere else. And it's still,
Long Island City.
it's still,
It's a Long
oh,
Island City.
okay. It's in
Yeah, well,
Long Island
I'm
City.
still talking Radio Row though, because I'm back in the '60s, and then later on in the early '70s, I got a job at work downtown on Canal Street, and by that time Radio Row was gone, but Canal Street was still alive, and I think it was around that time they were closing the Leeds store in Radio Row. Well, all the stores are closed, but I think Leeds was still open, and I remember he had a wall full of Arc 5s. The Navy transmitter, and it was selling everything by the pound. And I wish, but that store down the steps on Canal Street, at the time, I guess was the early '70s. I actually picked up an Atwater Kent AK-40 in there, replacing one that had disappeared that I had many years ago. So as a young kid, I bought a lot of stuff down. I remember Arrow, Leotones, remember Metro Electronics.
Mike Krantz.
Yeah.
Who?
Mike Krantz was another one.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, Metro Electronics, I bought my set of Altec Lansing Valencias.
Yeah, that was just an absolutely heavenly area.
It
There was
was.
also G&G Electronics, and they had a lot of surplus stuff on the second floor. And they had an elevator. You get in this thing, and you know that you're never going to get out again. It's a rickety thing. You had to pull on ropes to get it to go up to the second floor. And they had something that I just loved. They were selling Gibson Girl SOS transmitters. For if you're in a lifeboat, you have this thing, you crank it, it sends SOS. But they also were selling the balloons, hydrogen balloons that would take an antenna up about 1,000 feet from the lifeboat. And you send the balloon up and then you start cranking SOS and people find you that way. And I bought a lot of their balloons because you could put the hydrogen generator in water and blow up these balloons, and you now had about an 8-foot diameter hydrogen balloon that just took off straight up in the air. And so I thought, why don't I put some postcards on these? And I bought maybe 5 or 10 of those balloons and sent them up, and I had a postcard, self-addressed postcard. I wanted to see where the balloon ended up, and I figured maybe I'd get it over to Europe or somewhere out west or something like that. And one of the great disappointments of my ham career is that no one ever sent back a postcard.
We made it to Staten Island.
Yeah. Anyone else Radio Row stories?
Yeah.
I've been to Leeds, but it was in Brooklyn, so it was alive 10 years ago. Because I figured out about Radio Row way the hell after it was gone, and found out they were still existing. And the only thing I could say that was interesting, because I grew up in Lima, so I know Fair Radio. It had the same vibe. But what was crazy about Leeds was there was so much stuff in the small space he had in Brooklyn that my ears started ringing, because it was like an anechoic chamber, because it just completely isolated out the sound from all the equipment all the way around. It was crazy.
That's great.
Leeds is still in operation. He's in the South Bronx. He's right under he's just about a block away from the Bruckner Expressway when you get into the South Bronx.
Wow. I guess you got to go see it.
I had the pleasure of meeting Hugo about 25 years ago. A friend of mine was dealing with Hugo for just general replacement metal fabricated parts. Believe it or not, mostly sheet metal. And he took me to. He thought I was at the time I was about 14 or 15 years old, and he said, you'd get a kick out of Hugo. He said he's into all this stuff. I know you're into all that, and because I was always into making stuff, and he took me out to see him. We drove out to Brooklyn, and I remember it took a while to find a place to park, but it was amazing to see his shop, because I've always been, as well as a radio junkie, I'm a machine junkie, so that's another thing I'm into. But you know what? I think that the few hours we spent there talking to him probably was somewhat influential, because I actually do that kind of work now, and I just it was fascinating to me as a kid to see the stuff he was making, to see the stuff he was doing, and to see his collection that he had up in that front room before you went back into the shop was just it was a sight to see. Of course, I had no idea at the time that he made a lot of the stuff, and I had no idea that a lot of it was reproduction, but he was a character, and he was very talented, and he knew a lot of different stuff. But I remember the stories he used to tell. He was telling of a story. Of course, I think he spent his entire life in that area where he was there. And, knowing about New York, I mean, I grew up in Staten Island, but I had something of a knowledge about the industry that was at one time in New York. My father worked in manufacturing in New York in the 60s. But Hugo was telling us how over the years he would go and buy out things from stock houses and industrial supply places and warehouses and manufacturers. They went out of business. And one of the things he talked about, as if it was so much junk at the time, was how he had these boxes upon boxes of cattle and radio cabinets that were never actually, from a defunct company or something, and how he didn't know what to do with all these damn cattle and radio cabinets that at the time, nobody wanted, and how they were cutting them up and making other cattle. They were trying to figure out productive things to do with this cattle and material. And he still had a few pieces of cattle and rod and stuff like that he would machine, because cattle and machine, it's free machining, but he would make knobs and stuff out of it. And it was inspiring as a kid to see the stuff he was doing there. And I think about it from time to time, and it's pretty cool.
That's a great story. Can you tell us anything about what tools he had in the machine shop? It looks like maybe anywhere from 3 to 6 milling machines.
He had now, again, this 25 years ago, I was 14 years old, and I've been playing with these machines ever since. He had at least three Bridgeport. I think they were either J's or 2J's, either the belt change or the vari drives. He had a multi-head drill press with the common table. I remember that, like a Walker Turner setup. He had a Pexto stomp shear, about a 20-inch. He had, I believe it was maybe a Monarch 10-inch, the tool room lathe. He had like 2 of those, South Bend. I think he had a Gorton. Now you talk about, this is why I don't think Hugo was responsible for those name tags, because anyone who understands about engraving realizes that the speed and feed and cutter was all wrong. If you look at the way that the engraving on those reproduction tags is all burred on the edges of that could have been avoided by changing Hugo would have known how to do that right. And he had the Gorton pantograph machines to really do virtually anything like that, to copy and engrave. And I remember.
If I put the picture up on the screen, could you identify any of the things if I do that?
That he made. I just noticed on some of the things you mentioned were reproduction, that the engraving was of Hugo's machines.
The equipment.
Yeah, sure. It's funny. I remember seeing that black phone, the 554 phone on the wall. On the right side, side of the picture, okay, that's a Bridgeport mill. Okay, now you're not going to be, I obviously can't point to it, but up on the right side, that silver shiny thing, right?
Silver.
Yeah. Your mouse is right on it.
Oh, this one.
That there. That's
okay.
a Bridgeport J head milling machine. That's an earlier version. Okay.
Okay.
On the left side is the bank of drill presses. One's a freestanding, but there are multi-spindle machines together there. Okay. I'm trying to see. It's not. I remember that shop. I remember being in that shop. Yeah, yeah. And actually, to the right here, in front of the Bridgeport, I see the vice handle. That was that there. It looks like that's the small. He had a horizontal mill next to the Bridgeport. And I'm thinking, if I remember right, as you went back further, he had a couple more Bridgeports. I see one way in the back, a real early one. And I think in the middle was where he had the Gorton, the pantograph engraving machine, if I remember correctly. Again, it's 25 years ago. Now, you see the back of the chair. If in front of that was where he had some sheet metal stuff. He had the Pexto stomp shear. I think he might have had a notcher, stuff like that. And I think he had more sheet metal stuff against the back wall where the windows are. But again, and then over here on the left was his, his hand workbench. That was where his workbench was and his tools. And,
Hey, Darren, he had a brake back there too.
Yeah, he had he had a bar folder and I think a finger brake as well.
Right there.
Yes, there was a bar folder and a finger brake. The difference is a bar folder makes, clear bends, straight bends, and a finger brake allows you to bend where you have a compound bend to allow to clear for the compound bend. But he had those too. I do remember him using them. He was set up. He had, now doing stuff and knowing this stuff, he had everything that should be there was there, and nothing that really didn't need to be there was there. It was, he did a lot of, he had the machine set up in such a way that he could do multiple operations in almost a production fashion, which was really nice.
I don't see any obvious lathe. Is there one either in there and between them?
The lathe, in the back on the left side there. Yeah, there were two of them.
He also had a lathe. He also had a lathe on the right side towards the front.
Yeah, I think one of them
right forward of that he had a lathe.
If I remember correctly, and this, like I said, one of them was one of those 10-inch Monarch tool room lathes with the variable, forget the tube, I'm forgetting the type of tube. They actually had a tube drive on them. The pulse tubes. Yeah, I think he had that.
What for motor control?
Yeah, for motors. This is before in the days of inverters. This was Thyratron.
Oh yeah.
Or Thyratron, I believe. Yeah. And he had that. And he had. I'm trying to. He had small stuff like the engraving machines, but he also had the big Gorton pantograph. That I do remember.
What's that thing up there that looks like, is it a pulley, a multiple sheave pulley or something else?
I'm trying to see the picture on this is not the best monitor I'm using here. Hold on. Yeah, that looks like maybe that's a multiple speed pulley on one of the older lathes. Yeah, that could be an overhead drive for one of the, because a lot of times you would see, and you still see them in shops, lathes and generally machinery left over from I remember what that was. That's one of those big Kennedy Auto drill presses. That was one of the big drill presses that was originally designed to be driven from a line shaft above.
That was belt drive.
Yeah, converted to having the motor on the base of the frame. You see those around, a lot of machines that were designed for overhead drive from a line shaft were later converted to be driven by an independent motor in later years. You still see those things in use. But yeah, that's what I think. I do remember him having one of those massive drill presses that had.
Darren, was there a basement there too?
I was never in the basement.
Okay, let me tell you about the basement.
This is fabulous, guys.
The basement, I've been in the basement many times. That's where he had all his supplies. He had all the supplies down there. He knew where every bolt was, everything, he knew where everything was, but he had, cold rolled steel, stock, also anything at all that had to do with radio or machinery, he had downstairs was a storage room. The chairs that you saw there, you'd say, well, why does he have a few chairs? That's where the club sat. So when all these people came in, the 7th Street irregulars, to chat, and they'd stay a half hour or an hour, that's where they'd sit, right at those chairs. The third thing I want to mention is that if you want to know anything about Hugo, Hugo was interviewed by PBS many years ago, and that link should still be up there. So if you go to PBS, and if you go to Hugo Picciani, Picciani, you will see the video of Hugo, them interviewing him. He never threw anything away. He didn't believe anything should be thrown away. Everything should be saved and restored. That was him. He was a great guy. He really was. And he
is this the in the basement, or where is this?
No,
picture?
this is not in the basement. This is upstairs.
Huh.
That's the front. That's the front room.
Right.
When you walked into that building there, I
Right.
was only there twice. It was a big deal because we had to go all the way there, and I was there twice. That's the front room where
Right.
where he had those shelves when I was there, back in the early 90s. Those were full of all his radios. He also he had a collection of Roller Smith meters, and he was particularly interested in Roller Smith brand meters. I think I see one sitting on the bench. Yeah, I think that's one of them. He had a whole collection of those, and yep, I remember that. He liked meters. He loved meters, and yeah. And then if through that door in the back that says entrance above it, in there was like a bench. He had a work table and a little hi-fi setup where he'd listen to music. And on the left side, there was another door that was sort of like a sitting room and a library. And he had all his books in there, and he had lots of books on every subject in there. And yeah, every inch of space was used, and it was just a fascinating place to be.
Did he live there, Robert?
Upstairs.
Upstairs.
Oh,
Okay.
he did for a while. He had 2 apartments upstairs, but eventually he rented both of them out, and in that little room that Darren just described is where he lived, believe it or not. This music that he had on was WQXR.
Yeah.
That was always on, which was wonderful. And then if you go beyond this little room and his bedroom, there was that's where all the machinery was in the back of the store.
Is that through here?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So you went in through here into his room and then into the machinery beyond that?
His room was to the left where the red dot is. But if you go straight on, you will come to the shots that you had all the lathes, the drill presses, and all that stuff were in the back.
Okay.
The door where your red pointer is right now.
Right.
Went through that door on the right side was like a long bench built-in, like a built-in bench with bookshelves above it, and that was when I was there, he was using that as his paperwork, his design area where he would draw stuff up, and he had like T-square drafting stuff there. And you went further back, that's when you went into the shop. And on the left was his bedroom, I guess, / library. When I was there, I think he was using it more as a library because we were in there and he was showing us books, and he had everything from machine tool manuals to machinery's handbook, what do you call tube manuals. It was all there. He had everything there.
If I may, Hugo eventually sold the building, sold it to give money to his son, which and then he actually was divorced from his wife, Joan Miller, who lived actually not too far from where I live in Belmont. She lived in Freehold, actually Farmingdale, and he moved in with his ex-wife. And he stayed there for a long time until he fell a couple of times. And the wife says, I can't lift him up, I can't. So he went to live with his daughter in Old Bridge, and I really didn't see him up there because it wasn't that close, and I just didn't get up to see him. But he died in his sleep. He was 92. But also, what was great about him, he was sort of an intellectual. So he knew about people. He knew he could size people up. He had many interests. I'll give you a cute story. My wife is sitting here. She's gonna love this story. I can never pick out anything for my wife for Christmas or anything. I just can't because she has her own stuff that she wants to buy. And no matter what I give her, no, it's not right. She's got to exchange, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I came to Hugo and he says, how's your wife? And he was a ladies' man, even at 90, by the way. And he says, how's your wife? Fine. He says, give her these earrings. I said, what? He says, give her these earrings. I says, Hugo, I don't give my wife anything because she doesn't like what I get her. Give her the earrings. I says, Hugo, please, keep them. Give her the earrings. I said, okay, I'll give her the earrings. When I gave the earrings to my wife, she opened it up. Oh my God, these are beautiful. These are beautiful. And I told him that story and he laughed. He also had another story which is cute. Another cute story that he used to tell.
Listen.
His friend, he was at a party and his friend was talking to his friend and there was a beautiful woman there. And he was a ladies' man. And he told his friend, he says, see that girl over there, that woman over there? I'm going to have her reading out of my hand in 5 minutes. And his friend said, you're crazy. You don't even know her. He says, I will have her reading out of my hand in 5 minutes. So he said, okay, it was a bet. They put a wager on. Hugo goes over to the buffet table, picks out a cupcake, goes over to the woman and says to her, oh, he says, would you like to taste these? My wife just made these a few days ago. I think you might like these. So what does the woman do? She puts her hand in his hand and starts picking the cupcake out of his hand, and his friend's looking on. Funny story. That was Hugo. True story.
He was a character. He always, well, you know, the last time I went to visit him was, again, with my friend, and I was 17, and I had just gotten a car. And, you know, Hugo was one to keep things forever and to just keep fixing things. And he had just gotten rid of a car. And I had no idea of any of this. So somehow the car got mentioned. At the time, this was like 1996 or so, I had a 1971 Javelin. And this somehow was mentioned to Hugo, and Hugo laughed. He said, oh, I just got rid of my 71 Matador. I had it for 30 years, 20 years, whatever I had. He said, here. And he goes in the back and he brings me the 1971 American Motor Shop Manual. And he said, here. He said, you'll need this. He gave it to me. He was a really nice guy.
He really was.
Yeah. I still have this. I sold the car years later, but I do still have that manual kicking around, I'm sure.
Anybody else with thoughts, memories,
Yeah,
questions?
this is Marv. I don't remember the year, but at my first AWA conference in Canandaigua, I had just gotten into radio, and I was in a buying mood, and I was at a table that had a bunch of Atwater Kent breadboards on it, and I was eyeing them, you know, and asking questions to the seller, and I was considering buying one or two of them, and I sort of walked away for a minute, and then one of our members, Mark Middleman, he got me to the side and he said, you don't want to buy those. And I said, why not? He says, they're all fakes. I said, how do you know? He says, well, it's a long story, but trust me. But anyway, so that was my first experience with Phil. But
was he actually manning a table there?
Oh yeah, he was selling AK breadboards.
Wow.
And I think we have one of Phil's spherical audions in the museum. I'm pretty sure we do have one. It sort of looks like one of his. And the reason I can tell is that the green and red coverings, the insulating, they're just too new to look, you know, original.
Oh, Marv, they're genuine. I guarantee it. They're genuine.
No, but we ought to have that looked at. But I'm pretty sure it's a Phil fake.
Do you think he did some of those things on purpose so he had a way out to blame, you know, that plating on that screw on that handle? I feel like if he's that smart to make that he would know, you know, having grown up playing with all that old stuff, that it wouldn't have been plated. Do you think that was on purpose? Like his artist mark to know that he's like, yeah, it's not real. That's how I know, or whatever.
I doubt it very much. I think he made them as real as he could do. I'm rather surprised that he let the Marconi key go by with that angular step down as opposed to a sort of a sweep down. That looks so different.
Right, because you'd think he'd have one beside it that he was copying, you know.
I could tell you why it is that way. You know, from
Probably easier to make.
Manufacturing. What's that?
Easier to make, I'd guess.
No, well, no. Easier. The key that he had reproduced, which I can almost guarantee Hugo probably made that brass part, that was machined. That was milled on a milling machine. The original key was either, I doubt it was hammered on an anvil, but that was formed by hand or in a forming jig, in a bending jig.
It's drawn. You could see it was drawn.
Yeah, it's drawn or stamped down or bent either on an anvil or with a jig or press or very likely in those days they used to have hammers. They had little giant hammers or something they were using back in those. And that's not something.
But Darren, I think Hugo could have done that, couldn't he?
No. Hugo generally didn't do. I don't remember him doing iron work. He didn't have. He may have had an anvil, but he definitely did not have a hammer. He didn't have what they call a little giant hammer. That's something a little different. That's more for spring shops use. That's more for like blacksmith type work. He didn't. That wasn't what he did. Precision work. You know, he didn't do that. That's a little different branch of. And I don't remember. I just knowing what I saw of Hugo's work, that Hugo would have done the machine lever. Yeah.
Okay.
I had a question. The P-51 aircraft story you told, by chance, was that aircraft stolen?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. This is the reason for all this story. So
there's a story that I heard involved two gentlemen who owned a museum of equipment. They had two aircraft. They had a P-51 Mustang and an F-6F naval aircraft. This was about probably 1946. Someone stole the P-51 and flew it out of this area near Trenton. I don't remember where he said it landed, but it could have been in the area you mentioned. And unfortunately, I guess it's probably not, because the rest of the story I remember hearing is that they had to cut the wings off of it because they could not fly it out of the aircraft or the airfield where it had landed. So I guess it's not. The other half of my story is I have its radios in my attic.
I have a question. Tom, I've heard that some of Phil's fakes, his tubes, is actually worth more today than the original. In other words, my question is, what is the comparison of value between Phil Weingarten's fakes and the originals?
Oh, I think that the originals are still more valuable than Phil's, but I don't know. I haven't seen a side-by-side price comparison, mainly because people who have the tubes that he made don't want to admit it. And if they're going to sell them, they're not going to advertise, I'm selling a fake. They take it to Sotheby's or Bonham's and say, here's a tube for you to auction. I don't know where it came from. That's the typical, I don't know anything about it, but here it is.
I was just going to mention.
That's why the one we have in our museum is genuine.
Yeah, I was going to mention he probably got away with the fraud because a lot of people would not want to be exposed for spending $10,000 for something that wasn't real.
Yeah, the collector.
Don't ask, don't tell.
The collector who bought that ridiculous trophy with the key on top of it just happened to be a very good friend of mine and tell me the story. And he said, don't ever mention my name along with this.
See, exactly.
He's a great expert on spark keys too.
Hey, folks, what about the equipment that Hugo donated to our museum? Are those real or are they reproductions?
Of course,
well,
they're real.
John, I think most of it's real, but there is a wireless specialty apparatus, two-stage audio amp that I'm pretty sure Hugo made.
Okay.
it's a really nice job, and as but it was never finished. There were loose parts on the inside and stuff that, like I say, it was never finished. The door wasn't fitted exactly right, but the rest of it is just beautiful. It's on display down there with the World War I stuff. And yeah, we should have somebody look at the Audion. Like Marv said, the insulation on the wires is far too snappy.
I always assumed that was a repro, that Audion. Maybe
Yeah,
not.
I did too, right from the get-go. But
Yeah.
we should have somebody figure out if it's a Weingarten repro or what.
Well, at least we know it's not the German one.
And at least you didn't spend thousands for it.
Well, they made.
Yeah, I think that came from. Well, we don't know. I think that came from Broadcasters Hall of Fame, and no telling how they got it.
I think that equipment can be revisited.
It's really very interesting to think of how many fakes might be out there.
Yeah.
In terms of Enigma machines, they are so complicated that nobody has made a fake one except one guy who made 10 of them, and he used a lot of original parts in putting them together. And I cannot tell the difference between his Enigma and the real one, but we do know the serial numbers of his Enigmas, and he was selling them for $60,000 for his replicas, and the originals like this one sell for about $200,000. So it's an interesting comparison. I imagine if someone lost the serial number list of all of the 10 that he made, people could start ending up buying his and thinking they're originals because they're so good you can't tell the difference.
Yeah, I was gonna wonder if it was ever gonna mention the casual thing on the back of your desk. That's probably the most fancy thing that anybody has on any of our desks. It's just casually in the background.
Yeah. You've been doing this for 40 years. You have a few of these things lying around.
Yeah.
If you saw the Imitation Game movie, that was also one of my enigmas in that show. I'm happy about that. Also in Snowden, the movie Snowden. Any other thoughts, questions, memories? It's been really fun to learn about Hugo and hear more about Radio Row. I think we could have a whole session on Radio Row itself. Maybe some people took some pictures. I took a few. I took a movie when I was down there, but it's so bad. It's regular 8 and it jumps all over the place, but at least you can see it a little bit. I'll have to show that sometime.
Well, Tom, how about you talk a little bit about you yourself and your books?
I put together a book on telegraph keys because many telegraph keys are extremely, extremely valuable. And people who die, hams who die, their wives or whatever don't know what to do with their stuff. And someone comes along and buys the whole lot for a couple of $100 or something. And it was basically to try and help people to evaluate the value of their telegraph keys. And in the back of the book is a price guide that explains what the value of a given key is. For instance, if you happen to have a telegraph key like this one, this is actually a replica of the telegraph key that was on the Titanic. And if you had the real one, I have seen those sell for $20,000. And so the replica is very easy to tell because the guy put his name on the bottom of it happily. But if a person didn't know that, they might end up.
And it's not Phil Weingarten written there.
This is an extremely early Civil War telegraph key used during the Civil War. And to a person who doesn't know anything about telegraph keys, this might just look like a $5 key that you would have on the table of your Radio Shack. And so the purpose of writing the book was to try to educate people in the value of the really, really valuable stuff so they wouldn't get taken. I do know of one rather unscrupulous person who was infamous for finding out what ham had just died, and they would send in a person to the ham's home and say, I know a little bit about radio equipment and stuff. I'll give you an idea of what it's all worth. And the guy would walk around shaking his head saying, oh, terrible. Oh, too bad. And walk out saying, there's nothing here worth more than $100. And then 2 days later, the guy would, another dealer would come in and look around and say, well, there's not much here. I'll give you $400 for it. And the widow would take that $400 and lose maybe $50,000 or $100,000 worth of equipment in the process. So I was sort of down on that kind of behavior and trying to counter that by putting out a price guide.
How much is the Civil War key worth, the one you just showed?
The values of keys have changed because one guy bought all the keys in the world. It really sounds funny. K5 Victor Tango, Vince. He would buy every key that ever showed up on eBay. He had a separate house just filled with keys that he bought. And when he died, people went into the house and they found that he had never opened any of the boxes. He always had the keys shipped to him. He never opened any of the boxes. So this house was filled, the rooms were filled almost to the ceiling with keys that had never even been opened. And he paid ridiculous prices. He was the guy who paid $20,000 for that Marconi key. And in any event, when he died, his estate put all 10,000 of those keys on eBay. And so the value of Telegraph keys went down for about 10 years by about 90%, because every key that you thought was rare suddenly was on eBay. And nowadays they're coming up again. So to answer your question, pre-Vince, let's sort of like before Christ and after Christ, pre-Vince, BV, before Vince, the Civil War keys were selling for about anywhere from $2,500 to $5,000 for a Civil War telegraph key. And after Vince, they went down to about $500, and they're now back up to about $2,700, maybe $3,000 for real Civil War keys. The Civil War reenactors love these things. I have a friend who sets up an entire Civil War telegraph set. Interesting. Civil War telegraph is interesting because, you don't want to get me started on these things, because so few people know how important a role telegraph played in the Civil War. You look at 90% of the books on the Civil War, they don't even have the telegraph in the index in the book. But Lincoln spent a lot of time in the telegraph office getting reports about what was going on. And there's also this little Enigma machine, Civil War Enigma machine, which is like a little code wheel that they used to encode the messages. And now that you're mentioning, I just happen to have a Civil War pocket spy telegraph set here. And this is a little set that a Civil War spy would stick in his pocket. And over here on this side, you can see a telegraph key with a little knob on it. Yeah. And over here is a sounder. And you take one of the wires here and you hook it to a bayonet and stick it in the ground. And the other wire you throw over the enemy's telegraph line, which was never insulated, just bare wire. And you could then literally tap into the telegraph messages of the enemy. And if you were good, you could actually send false messages using this key. So that's a Civil War pocket telegraph set, has a little cover on it and looks like that, fits in your pocket. They sell for about $3,000 nowadays.
That is really cool.
More than you wanted to know. I'm sorry. You don't
no, that is awesome.
I want one of those for my QRP rig.
Yeah. You got to have small fingers for that telegraph key, though. It's really, really pretty tiny. Yeah.
How come we didn't see this in the Wild Wild West TV show? You know,
You didn't look in the right places.
probably. Thank you so much. Your presentation was excellent.
Thank you, guys. Always fun to talk to you and to do these things. It makes me feel like maybe I'm not as old as I am, really.
Tom, a quick question. I know it's off topic, but I can't resist. Shortly after World War II, I'm sure, I guess people brought home Enigma machines in duffel bags and Foot Lockers as souvenirs. What was one of those worth, you know, I don't know, 60, 70 years ago?
Well, let's see. At the end of World War II, Hitler ordered every Enigma machine to be destroyed. And when the World War II ended, Churchill ordered every Enigma machine to be destroyed. So from 30,000 Enigma machines, we are now down to 280 existing Enigma machines. I'm the only person who's maintaining that list. And that doesn't answer your question, but I just want to give you a little background. So we're talking about roughly 280 machines. A guy brings one home in a duffel bag and sells it locally. It's going to sell for about the same price as a typewriter because it basically looks like a typewriter, maybe $5 or $10 at a flea market. The cheapest one I ever bought was back in 1980, and I paid $6,000 for it. The most expensive one I ever bought was $100,000. The cheapest one I ever sold was at Dayton for $18,000, and the most expensive one I ever sold was through an auction house for $550,000. Can you imagine someone having a choice between a $550,000 Rolls Royce and a $550,000 Enigma machine and buying a piece of junk like that instead of a Rolls Royce?
Wow.
Does that give you any idea what range?
I had no idea that they were destroyed. I just thought they, like everything else, they ended up in landfills and, you know, whatever.
No, Hitler did not want those machines in the hands of his enemy. It was, what do you call it, the burned earth, scorched earth policy or whatever. He wanted them all gone. And then Churchill wanted them all destroyed because he didn't want them in the hands of the Russians and so on. But what he did was a really sneaky thing. He gave 40 Enigma machines to Israel. And he said, hey, here's a really neat machine. Why don't you use it for your own internal military security? It's a really secure machine. He didn't bother telling Israel that the British were able to crack the Enigma code. And so he was basically giving them a Trojan horse. And luckily, somebody who had been in England knew that the machine could be broken and told Ben-Gurion, and Ben-Gurion never put those machines into operation. But wonderful stories about this stuff that just go on and on.
Hey, Tom.
And that's a whole nother talk, guys.
Do they still show up, or when's the last time a new one was found?
Well, I just found one yesterday that I didn't have in the list, and I have a bunch of, you know, what we'd call pickers, people that you pay to go out and
looking for them.
And I got a bunch of pickers in Europe, and they usually manage to find me about 2 a year. And I pay them $10,000 whenever they find me one, so they're pretty motivated. And so I've been doing this for 40 years, and it's a lot of fun.
I think it can be assured that they are sitting in basements and attics in Europe and in the United States from people who had them, passed away, squirreled them away, like everything else. And being in the right place at the right time, you're going to find it.
Hey, Tom, I heard...
That's why you need a family of an army of pickers. You can't do it all yourself.
Yeah, Tom, I heard what they try to do with them is throw them overboard so the salt water would destroy them. Is that true?
Not great because we've gotten a couple out of submarines and actually restored them to working
Really?
condition. So what they typically did, the Germans insisted that you put a hand grenade in the thing and detonate it.
That'll do it.
Blow the thing up, but the soldiers didn't like to do that because it was dangerous as hell. So they would typically, the ones that I've gotten mostly out of battlefields that were supposedly destroyed most of the time, they would kick them to get rid of the plug board on the front. They would hit them with the butt of a rifle to smash in the top, and then they'd shoot the thing 3 or 4 times with the rifle to destroy the rotor. So that was the typical way of doing it if you didn't want to blow it up with a hand grenade. God, how'd we get on that topic? I thought we were talking about Phil Weingarten. This Zoom stuff is crazy.
Well, obviously you're a wealth of information, Tom. That's why we're mining you. And you've done so many things and involved in so many things. And like I said, with this book on keys, it's been a great value to me because I have bought a few keys and I've sold a few keys. And thanks to this guide, I learned a hell of a lot about it in the history.
I'm glad to hear it. It was a lot of fun to do it. My book on the Enigma is much more complex and detailed. And if you ever get into enigmas, I can recommend that to you. It's called Inside Enigma, and it is literally inside the Enigma. But perhaps the most important and interesting part of the whole book is not the German Enigma, but the Russian Enigma. The Russians came out with an extremely complex machine like an Enigma for use during the Cold War. And it is so complex that it's fascinating. The Enigma machine itself is just basically a flashlight, a battery and a light bulb. It doesn't connect to anything. All it does is light up a light bulb when you type in a letter. And the Russian machine is incredibly more complex.
And the Russian machine was all mechanical also?
No, electromechanical. Okay, I see a Navy key being held up. Classic, beautiful, flame-proof Navy key, widely used during World War II. Neville, yeah. Everybody see that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, Neville's got it, yeah.
Tom, the Civil War key, that's the Camelback? Is that what that was called?
Yes, right. The Camelback design, there are several different kinds of Camelbacks. Let's see if we have another one. More typically, it would perhaps look like this. And nobody has satisfactorily explained why the Camelback is there. Some people call it a humpback. Some people call it Camelback. And it is typical of that era. The problem with Camelback keys is that the brass was pressed onto a steel trunnion shaft. So you can see this here. The lever is, where's the lever? Lever is where am I? Lever, it's not showing up. Anyway, you can see that the lever of the key, the brass thing, is pressed onto a steel trunnion. And if you use the key enough, the darn thing loosens up and the lever starts sliding back and forth. Oh, I was looking at the sounder, sorry. Let's try the telegraph key itself. The, hard to see, the telegraph key. The lever is pressed onto the trunnion. And if you use the key enough, the lever starts sliding back and forth and the key becomes useless and they get thrown out. So very few of these survive because they almost self-destruct. It's almost like you'd put in a self-destruct design in them. Any other questions? Any other comments? Planned obsolescence, right you are, Joe. Well, thank you all for joining. Thank you for watching. If you like, I'll do another one of these at some point on some other dumb topic. Hopefully keep your interest, but I can't ever do what we did with Hugo to get all that wonderful information about Hugo. That was just fabulous.
Tom, we're just so happy to have you as a member of our club now. We're honored to have you as a member of our club.
I'm honored to be a member of the club.
Well, that says a lot. That says a lot. We got to come down, visit our museum, see what we do, talk to more of our people. Maybe someday we'll be able to shake hands. That would be nice too, you know?
I wish I still lived in New Jersey. I'm up here in Vermont in the middle of 400,000 acres of national forest, literally. I bought a farm that the government couldn't buy. And so I'm about as isolated from everything as you could ever ask. My biggest danger is not the virus, but bears.
Do the bears wear masks?
And Tom, if you ever come down, you stay with me. You got a
Yeah,
place
thank
to
you,
stay.
Robert. I remember that offer. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So you don't just collect the radios for funsies. You need one to communicate with the outside world.
Yeah, darn near. There's no cell phone coverage up here.
Yeah.
I have what's called a simplex auto patch, where I can take my handy talkie and walk around and call into my station and then hook that to the phone line. So it's a ham's half-assed cell phone.
That's awesome.
Phone patch like the old days.
Yeah.
Right.
How about a sat phone?
Perfect.
Tom, I guess I can answer this. How do you spell Hugo's last name?
Say again?
Hugo, his last name. How do you spell it?
Picciani.
I. Correct.
Picciani, double C.
Dicciani. Okay, thank you.
Nice Irish fellow.
Well, gentlemen, we're coming to almost 10 o'clock. That's officially our end of our meeting. I will end the meeting at this moment, but obviously everybody can stick around as you usually do. I can only say, again, thanks to Tom and his presentation, and he's offered to make more, and boy, will we grab him for more, guys. You know that's going to happen. Especially when he can give a presentation without taking a sip of water and talk for 45 minutes straight. That is absolutely amazing, absolutely amazing. All right, so officially, our August 14th meeting is adjourned, and it was a great meeting, wonderful meeting. All right, and we look forward to our September meeting, hopefully in the flesh at InfoAge at 9032A. Yes, we will be socially distanced, and yes, we'll have masks, and yes, we'll do whatever the governor has in store for us. But we do want to get back to a normal, and I hate the term new normal, but I just want to get back to a normal. Okay.
Amen.
Amen. Yeah. Okay. Please talk, and again, Tom, thanks so much, and we can't wait to see you again. Can't wait to see you again.
Thank you.
sir.
I hope maybe we'll see a lot of you at the New England Vintage Electronics Club meet. What is it, September what? Somebody have that date?
Yeah, it's September 26th, everybody, up in, let's see, Brookline, just outside of Nashua.
Yeah, I've been once. I have not been recently, though. Yeah.
Really nice meet. Great people.
And it's worth it to come down to Kutztown, too, and see that. I don't think you've ever experienced that.
He was there.
I've been down there. It's a wonderful meet.
Oh, you have? Okay, good.
Incredible.
Good. Oh, I wish I had met you then. Okay.
You probably did. I was hiding behind an Enigma machine.
Okay. Okay. All right, guys. Talk amongst yourselves. Safe home. Don't get into accidents, okay?
Yeah.
Take care, Tom. We'll talk. We'll talk.
Thank you. Tom, miss seeing you at Rochester, and none of you remember me, but I used to talk to you and your wife at the table, so say hello to your wife for me.
Oh, yes, I remember you very well. That's a beautiful microphone you've got there. Are you actually using it to speak now, or is it just there for us to drool over?
It's legit. I just had it refurbished by ENAC, you know, ENAC.
Right.
And just got it back about 2 weeks ago, so I'm using it.
Do they re-ribbon it when they do that?
Yeah, that's what it was. It needed a ribbon. They re-ribboned it and changed some hardware, and it was in pretty good shape. I bought it on eBay back in 1998, and I paid a whopping $900 back then.
That was a good deal.
Good deal, yeah.
Yeah, they're wonderful mics. I love the sound. And you're using it now? We're listening to it? I love it. That's so great.
That's good. That's
What
it.
do you have for a preamp to interface it to the computer? Or
It's a little, what's the name of it? It's made by ART. It's a combination preamp and phantom supply in case I want to use a condenser mic.
Don't turn the phantom power on.
I know. God.
Oh, Phantom Supply with the ribbon mic.
Yeah.
That-
It become a toaster.
yeah.
Make sure the power's off. Yeah, the phantom power's off.
We wouldn't be hearing you if it was on.
Actually,
I got to figure out how to interface this one. I think it's a carbon element to the computer. I think that'd be really cool.
It's been done. It's been done.
It's been done. Yeah.
Yeah. Where's John Tominski? He's been doing that. Yeah.
Not on tonight.
Yep. So.
Any other comments? Anything? Bedtime.
How far north are you in Vermont? All the way up near Hyde Park?
No, we're right in the exact center of the state. It's Middlebury, near Middlebury College. And then there's this ridge of mountains where the Middlebury Snow Bowl is, where they have their ski area. And we're way up in the mountains at an elevation of 2,000 feet.
So
Yeah, it's a pretty
the
state.
question, why did you move up there, Tom?
I really didn't like New York City. Moved to New Jersey when my kids started getting mugged on the street. And I bought the farm up here in Vermont about 50 years ago. And I bought an airplane the same year and just flew back and forth because I didn't like the New York City area. It was just too crowded for me. And I like being way out in the boonies. And then you can't get much further out in the boonies than this. And finally, I love big equipment too. So I bought a big bulldozer and I leveled off the back field so I could land there. And my wife looked at me and she said, "Land there? You're out of your mind." So she would never land there, but I enjoyed landing in the back field.
And now we have member Joe Devonshire is more north than you are.
Yeah.
So here's what the lousiest microphone on tonight sounds like.
Oh, I like that. That's cool. That's going to be neat.
This is plugged straight into a computer because the bias for the electret element that they put with cheap computer mics is enough current to run a carbon mic, just barely enough to run it.
So how do you do that? What's the electrical circuit?
Plug it straight in.
Straight?
No matching transformer?
No matching transformer, no nothing.
Really?
Oh, now I'm going to have to try that on my next Zoom call at work.
Please don't.
So is that an electret element in the telephone case? Is that what you did?
No, I think he's using like the power.
Oh, there we go. There we go. All right, you got to press the right button here.
Okay.
That's actually a full original 1923 carbon microphone that's shipped with an RCA transmitter, which I have, which someday I threatened to put it on the 1929 contest.
Cool. So did you say, is that mic feeding directly into the computer or you have some interface?
I plugged it straight into the computer. The bias for the electret circuit within the computer is enough to run a carbon mic.
Huh. Well, stand by while I fire you up, baby. You're going to be my microphone.
For it. We want to hear it.
Go for it, Tom.
That one came from the wonderful Saratoga Ham Fest about 10 years ago. Anybody been up to that one? Not, a little far north for Jersey boys. Bill, do you have other microphones there besides that one? Looks like you might be a mic collector.
Yeah. I don't know if you can see in the back. I got an RE27 on the boom by Ham Shack. Matter of fact, I just went over, I redid my inventory. I've got about 275 mics.
Good for you. Were you up there when Bob Paquette was at AWA?
I know of him. No, what year was that?
It feels like maybe 10 or 15 years ago. I sat at his feet and just ate up every word he said. He was the king of mic collectors and expert, unbelievable guy. And he sat there, he did a talk, and he sold his book. And he just sat in the, I think he was sitting in the contest area. Over by his mics and just talking to us. And it was just like sitting at the feet of a great teacher.
Did he have a museum that closed? Didn't he have a museum? Didn't he have a museum that closed, or was some mic museum closed?
I don't think he ever closed. He just died eventually.
Okay.
Well, I was fortunate enough to visit Bob at his museum a number of years ago, probably about 6 or 10 years ago. And yeah, it was, what a guy. I mean, he took us on a tour through the whole place, and he knew details about every single element. He had more than microphones in there. I mean, he had camera dollies, and he had a replica of the center section of a B-17 bomber full of with the radios in there. I mean, it was an insane place. And Bill, I watched him re-ribbon a ribbon microphone in the shop while I was there. He was an interesting guy. I heard that his family sold all the microphones off after he passed away, though.
Really?
I think they sold them to some kind of a museum. So I think his collection is basically intact.
Well, I think his name is Bill.
Which one I think closed? James Steele. James Steele?
That's the one, right. I remember.
That closed, yeah.
I never met him in person, but we did a lot of communicating over the years.
Wasn't he affiliated with a church or something? I remember there's one mic museum, and it was somehow affiliated with a church.
Don't know.
I thought it was James Steele, maybe.
Yeah.
Thank God that Kutan site's still around. That's an interesting site.
Yeah, that's a great site for mic references. That's yeah. Are you also a microphone collector?
Who are you talking to?
Yeah. Are you Tom? Are you a microphone collector?
Yes, I have.
Oh, okay.
I put all my stuff. I did a really sneaky thing. I collected a lot of stuff, and then I put it all on the internet, and I finally sold it off so it wouldn't end up. My wife said, "If you die and leave all this stuff, I'll kill you." And after 60 years of marriage, I didn't want to risk that. So all of my stuff is on the internet, and I have a microphone museum associated with the Telegraph Museum. It's all under w1tp.com. Microphone museum, got a museum of quack medical devices, museum of cipher machines, all kinds of stuff on there. It's a neat way to display your stuff without having to worry about security or anything like that.
Yeah, it's funny. I tried to sell a microphone on eBay. I don't know if you recognize this. It's a the Electro Voice. It's a boom mic.
Yeah.
And like I said, I was searching for a particular microphone, and which made me decide to redo my inventory. And I found out I got 4 of these. Anyway, I put it on eBay.
The market.
I put it on eBay. It wouldn't sell.
Whoa.
No. 10 days wouldn't sell, so I relisted it.
It looks like a Yagi antenna.
Yeah.
What's the value of that roughly?
The market's depressed. I mean, one time they were going for like a few $100s. I mean, I don't want to take $8 for it, so I started it at $49.95, and I didn't get any bids.
People might be worried it's a Weingarten microphone.
Is that a directional mic, or is it just?
No, it's a shotgun mic. It's a directional mic. Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
It's meant to be mounted on a boom, and but yeah, I didn't realize I had 4 of them. That's a sign of sickness.
That happens.
That was the other reason. That was the other reason for buying a farm in Vermont. It had 11 outbuildings, and I was able to fill most of them with all the junk I'd gotten out of Radio Row.
At least it's not 4 Enigma machines. I couldn't afford that.
I don't have any fantastic stories from Radio Row, because the first time I got there, the first and pretty much the last time was in 1969 when the bulk of Radio Row was gone, but there were still a few shops, spotted up and down Canal Street, I guess. And we were just goggle-eyed. I was in high school, and we took the bus in, and we're carrying all the radios back on the bus, trying to get home. It was amazing. And then we also found a place in Newark, New Jersey, because Newark was kind of a hotbed of 1920s radio, and there was one old place left in the late 60s, in the very early 70s, which was a multi-story building just crammed with millions and millions and millions of parts going back to the 20s. And that was a great place to go shopping when you were in high school too.
Yeah, Canal Street was like Radio Row Light.
That's all we had.
Yeah, no. What happened was when like I said before, the Trade Center. I was a high school teenager. I'd go to Radio Row, and then of course the Trade Center came, and then coincidentally I got that job down by Canal Street in '71, and for a few years, Canal Street was the best part of my day. Was my lunch hour. Just walking around Canal Street, everything from that guy down the basement. Matter of fact, at that time, I think Leeds was up on Broadway. They were on Broadway, a little north of Canal Street, weren't they? Have I confirmed that?
What was the name of that place again?
No, Leeds.
Leeds Radio.
Oh, Leeds. Yeah, Leeds was what would it be? West of Canal Street on Cortlandt Street.
No, later on, they moved up to Broadway near Houston Street.
Okay, I never saw it when it moved.
Yeah, it was upstairs. I went there once.
Uh-huh.
But,
Well, you said that you think he sold it to his kid. They must have sold it to his kid then when I saw it, because when I saw Leeds 10 years ago, the guy was probably only 20 years older than me that was running the place, and he was the owner, the manager or whatever. So I knew he didn't found the place in 1923 like the sign said, but it was interesting. I was in there just looking around, and there was actually people coming in, hipstery people that were production people, for shows, movies or whatever, and he would actually rent the stuff, the set dressing stuff, mad science stuff like icoscopes and stuff. It was just cheap background stuff for whether it was commercials or student films or whatever. But it was interesting that's what a lot of his business was at the time, I guess.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, go Darren.
Oh, I mean, I remember as a kid being told stories of all the radio places in the city. And one day I remember my dad actually said, all right, we'll take a trip into the city and I'll show you where all the radio shops are. So he took me to Canal Street. And of course, I'm a lot younger. So this is about 1990, I guess. I don't know, 91. And he was shocked and I was disappointed to find out there were like only 2 or 3 left. And they generally charged a lot of money for anything they had.
There was some boom boxes around that time. Yeah.
There were still a couple of places that had tubes and whatnot, but it wasn't, boxes of stuff that you could buy for $1. It was, oh, you want a tube? It's $50, at a time when the tubes weren't worth anywhere near that. But
yeah, when I remember going around the Radio Row, Cortlandt Street, Church Street, that area, people never changed the windows. The stuff they had displayed in the windows had about 20 years of dust on it. I remember that.
You're right.
It's kind of amazing that they were able to stay in business as long as they were, that there was that much demand for, I guess the real estate must have been a lot cheaper there then, that they could house all that stuff and just sell a $10, $15, $5 item. That's... You think about it.
The volume there was really high. If you were at Radio Row on a weekend in the 50s, 60s, 70s, the place was mobbed. People came from all over just to pick up that stuff and to look at it. And there was stuff there you couldn't get anywhere else, or at least you couldn't look at it if you had to buy it by mail order. So I think they did pretty well.
Tom, do you remember Harrison Radio that had a ham station in the window?
Yeah, they did, right?
Was that I forget what it was.
They changed it. I don't think they kept that for very long. But
oh, really? I thought it was like I can't think what it was. It was a whole desk area with the linear, and they had. I remember they had Electro Voice 664 on the desk. I remember that big, because Harrison was on the corner, right? The door was on the corner, I think.
No, it was in the middle of a block with a huge vertical sign that said Harrison Radio.
I remember being on the corner. Huh. Hmm.
Remember, post-war, Cortlandt Street became hi-fi and then verged into stereo, and that's where they were able to continue right into the late 1960s before they were bought out for the Trade Center. So they still made their money in hi-fi and stereo. They were still around for that. And then you had the dusty boxes and the dusty back rooms for all of our old stuff.
And I guess Leeds is the last vestiges, right?
Well, I think probably yes. Harvey Radio was in business for quite a while in Midtown.
45th Street.
45th
Yeah,
Street,
that's it.
yeah.
And they eventually closed.
Arrow was up there too.
Yes, right. And what was that other one on Broadway that got robbed? Barry was on Broadway, and they had a lot of ham equipment and stuff. Lower Broadway, way down.
Yeah. Barry.
And Bill, when you were down where you worked, wasn't Kaufman Surplus still down there? Kaufman?
What was the name of it?
Kaufman Surplus.
No. On Canal Street?
Yeah, on Canal Street, yeah.
I worked there from 71 to...
On the west Canal Street.
No.
And they moved, eventually they moved up to 42nd Street across from the Port of Authority.
No, don't remember that name, no.
No.
All right.
Was that Radio Row uniquely a New York thing, or were there Radio Rows in other big cities like
Every major
Chicago?
city had one. Every major city.
As a matter of fact, I just read a few weeks ago, I have a lot of old back issues of Popular Electronics, and there's an article in there about the Radio Row in Japan.
Oh, Akihabara.
Yeah, right. That's
I
it.
can't say it, but yeah, that's like the most famous one because it's just gigantic, and it's
You knew about that, huh?
it's a haven for Japanese electronics like 80s video games and things like that. Some of the consumer stuff, laser discs and all that crazy stuff. That's like the haven for it, or at least it was. They started cracking down on it. But I know it's been around forever.
So it's still in existence, selling, current stuff?
They still sell stuff. I've never been there. Rich may actually have, because he traveled. But I read an article a couple years ago that they were cracking down on selling secondhand stuff. Like you need to have a license to sell used goods or something like that. So that was supposed to choke it out and kill it. But I don't know if that actually passed or happened.
Yeah, this article is about in the 60s, so it was the equivalent of our Radio Row, but at least.
I think a lot of what drove that, from what I've read and what I've been told, was some of the manufacturing in and around the city. Just like there was the machinery exchange, which was the same thing for machine tools. And now that there's really no more manufacturing in New York, I think that also did away with a lot of the parts suppliers and stuff that were there, because there's no more need for, it was a much more localized business back then, I think. I mean, I know, a lot of hi-fi equipment in the 60s was built right in Long Island City and Brooklyn. And I know that, these distributors were being locally, now there's no more industry. So, that's probably was also a major factor in the decline, right?
Let me try, I've got a video that I made, or a movie that I made of Radio Row. Let me see if I can play it. I'm not sure that it will work or not, but I took it as a kid, and I don't know whether this is going to work. We'll just give it a try and see. Let's see, we're going to do a share screen, and we're going to go over here, and we're going to try and play it. Off in the distance there, you see the elevated West Side Highway, and on the right, just before the highway, is Rex Radio, a wonderful emporium of World War II surplus radios at very, very reasonable prices. Unfortunately, Is that coming through at all?
Yeah.
Is the audio coming through?
The audio is coming through.
Okay. Keep it going. Tell me to stop if you get bored. Entire Radio Row district was demolished in order to make way for the World Trade Center. So we see here some of the cranes that are in the process of demolishing the buildings. And we look here in this view, and that white fence that you see is actually where Rex Radio and many of the other stores had been located just a few weeks earlier. Little by little, the entire Radio Row district was leveled in order to make room for the World Trade Center. This is some of the work that was going on even before they had demolished all the buildings. They were pouring foundations for the World Trade Center, cement foundations, and people working down in the foundations getting ready to put up the buildings, which were later to become the World Trade Center. Here's some of the demolition work going on. The buildings were demolished to rubble, and then the contents were simply carted off in trucks. Whether any useful things in there or not, some of the owners left things behind. Phil Weingarten was one of the people who managed to get in there and salvage some of the equipment, and I managed to sneak in to a couple of the buildings and bring out some radio equipment before they all went to the demolition project. But it was a little dangerous to do that because people were always watching this project, and it wasn't safe to be down there at night because there was quite a criminal element. So you had to do it sort of in broad daylight. There's Kaufman. Here's some more street scenes.
Yep, Kaufman.
Radio Row. Kaufman was Army Navy surplus, so they had a fair amount of clothing. And you're going to see Harrison. And this is another view down Chambers Street toward the river, the West Side Highway in the Heinz and Bolle is visible, but Rex and the other radio stores were long gone by that time. Heinz and Bolle had quite a mix of things to offer. They were fun to go through, and again we see the destruction, demolition of the buildings taking place here. Very large cranes were used in order to swing wrecking balls a long distance. Some of these buildings were very well built, and so it took a major impact from a wrecking ball in order to be able to destroy the building and completely eliminate it. There's Harrison. But it went fairly quickly. Leeds. You could take down a building, it looked like, in a matter of just a few weeks. This is Harrison Radio, wonderful outlet of ham radio stuff I'll tell you about in a moment, but this is Leeds' little radio store. And Mr. Leeds was a really cantankerous old guy. There's his showroom window, which just had dirty old junk in it. He was a cantankerous old guy who smoked a huge cigar, and he would kick people out of his store if he didn't like them or if they tried to bargain with him too hard. One day he got really drunk and allowed me to go up in his upstairs rooms, which was quite a thrill to see all the stuff that he had stored up there. Before that scene, we saw Harrison Radio. Harrison Radio catered to ham radio operators. They maintained a stock of about 500 beautifully maintained and always working ham radios, including maybe 100 to 150 Collins sets. If you knew the salesman real well, he would go back to Mr. Harrison and plead for you to come down in the price a little bit. And Mr. Harrison always took pity on young hams, and he would lower the price of some of his equipment rather nicely in order to make it accessible to some of us who didn't have the money to pay his full asking price. More scenes of the demolition of Radio Row here with the cranes and the rubble in the background. It was very sad to see these buildings come down. And we tried all kinds of techniques, letters to the mayor and everybody else to try and get them to save historic Radio Row. but they certainly never listened to that, and the buildings just consistently kept coming down. The Tinker's Paradise was full of neat little tidbits of electronics, a lot of fun to work through, and really quite inexpensive in general. Big Motorola sign, and again we see Morel's radio, and they specialized in hi-fi systems, mono hi-fi tube type. That's probably enough. Let me see if I can get out of this. Stop share. I guess were you able to see most of that? The quality obviously horrible. It's old, a kid holding a straight 8 camera in those days, and then trying to transfer it over to an electronic digital form. Not great for it, but maybe you could at least see a couple of the buildings.
Oh, it's entertaining, that's for sure.
Piece of history.
Yeah.
Yeah, the quality doesn't have to be spectacular for you to be able to appreciate, you know.
Okay, what do you say we call it quits, guys? There's always another meeting.
Oh yeah. What are you doing next week?
I got another Zoom presentation to give somewhere. I think the funniest one I ever gave was to the hackers on planet Earth a couple of weeks ago.
In New York?
20,000 people at that one. That's just an amazing group. Incredible. I talked about the Enigma, and I called my talk Hacking the Enigma because of the name of the conference.
Well, as you get you're on the communicator, you do get the emails, right?
Yes.
All right. Well, you see that Al Clays holds a social every Tuesday afternoon and on Thursday evenings. So you're certainly welcome to drop in on those too. You know, we'd love to see you and love to hear from you again.
Thank you. I will try. Believe it or not, I'm really busy with all this stuff going on. Plus,
I do believe it. Yeah.
Plus, I do like sailing, and so I try to get out on the sailboat about every week or so. And Lake Champlain's about 150 miles long, and it's a big lake and good sailing. Quite interesting. Also incredible diving. The lake is so cold down below the thermocline that these Revolutionary War and Civil War wrecks are just perfectly preserved.
And 1812 too.
I'm sorry?
And 1812 wrecks also.
Yes, right. The only problem is it's damn cold down there. You go from 50-degree water down to 38-degree water in 1 inch the thermocline, and going through that thermocline is really painful.
I learned to swim in that lake, I remember.
Have you seen Champy?
I keep looking for Champ. I haven't seen him or her yet, but I'm waiting. Got my camera ready.
Okay, guys, let's call it a night. And we ended the meeting already, and now it's 10:23.
Wow.
So, again, thanks, Tom, and we'll see you soon. We'll Zoom you soon and see you soon.
Very good.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, guys. Enjoyed talking with you.
Okay.
Over and out.
Good night.
Good night. Good night, guys. Good night. Good night. Good night.
Here we are.
I like your World's Fair thing, Rich, behind you.
Still here.